5,000 troops, gone. That was last week. Then Trump spoke again on Saturday. We're going to cut way down, and we're cutting a lot further than 5,000. Nobody in NATO had been told. Nobody had been consulted. The announcement came without warning, without coordination, without a plan. And in the space of 48 hours, the alliance that held the Western world together for 80 years entered a new era. This is the story of how it happened, and what Europe is now being forced to build without America. The dispute started with Germany, and it started with a single sentence. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz said that the United States had been humiliated by Iran in the nuclear talks. He said it publicly, he said it clearly. Trump heard it, and Trump responded the way Trump responds. He announced the withdrawal of 5,000 troops from Germany. He cancelled the planned deployment of a long-range fires battalion, Tomahawk missiles, hypersonic weapons, gone from the schedule. Then on Saturday he went further, not 5,000, way further than 5,000. The Pentagon had no statement ready, NATO had no briefing prepared. The 32 members of the alliance found out from press reports the same way everyone else did. Think about what that means. The most powerful military alliance in human history, blindsided by a tweet. If you're finding this useful, subscribe to the Record Room, because this story does not end in Germany, because Trump did not stop at Germany. He turned to Italy, he turned to Spain. Italy had refused to allow US military flights from Sigonella for the Iran campaign. Spain had denied US forces the use of its airspace and its bases entirely. France and the UK had declined to give Washington free rein over their territory. Trump was asked whether he would consider withdrawing troops from those countries too. He said, "Probably, why wouldn't I?" That word, probably, landed differently in Rome than it did in Berlin. Italy has 12,600 American troops on its soil, 8 bases, Sigonella, Aviano, Naples, the logistical hub of the entire Mediterranean. Spain has Rota and Moron, naval assets, air power, decades of infrastructure. Neither country had been consulted, neither had been warned. Both were now waiting to find out whether the American president's probably was theatre or policy. Now here is what happened next, and why it matters more than the withdrawal itself. Europe's leaders gathered in Yerevan, Armenia, on Monday, the European Political Community Summit, 47 countries in one room, and one by one they said the same thing. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre, EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas, French President Emmanuel Macron. Every single one of them said, Europe must take care of its own security now, not as a threat, not as a protest, as a statement of fact. Von der Leyen did not mention America by name. She talked about trade deals with Australia and India. With like-minded friends, she said, you have stable, reliable supply chains. She was not talking about supply chains. NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte tried to calm the situation. He said Europeans had heard a message. He said they were now making sure bilateral basing agreements were being implemented. But Rutte also said something else. He said European nations had decided to pre-position key assets close to the theatre for the next phase. He did not say which theatre. He did not say which assets. He did not need to. Consider the scale of what is being asked of Europe right now. Germany is launching its first major military expansion since the Second World War. The country that was specifically designed after 1945 to never again be a dominant military power is now being told by Washington, you are on your own. France, the UK, Germany. They have promised a new era of defence spending. But as analysts have noted, the challenge is not money. The challenge is capability. Europe does not produce missile defence interceptors at scale, not the kind capable of countering ballistic missiles, not the kind that can substitute for Patriot systems or THAAD. The burn rate of these systems in the Iran war has been described as staggering. The US is sending more to Gulf allies. Europe is watching its own stockpiles and realising they are not sufficient. Smaller production runs, fragmented defence industries, a dozen different tank models where America produces one. The collapse of the Franco-German fighter jet program stands as the perfect symbol. France and Germany could not agree on who would lead the project. The CEO of Dassault eventually said, "If they want to do it themselves, let them." That sentence could describe all of European defence in 2026. If America wants to do it alone, let them. But Europe is not ready to do it alone either. And that gap between American withdrawal and European readiness is the most dangerous space in world politics right now. Now, here is the dimension that connects this directly to Italy. Meloni has been navigating this crisis for weeks. She refused Sigonella. She defended the Pope. She absorbed Trump's public rebuke without flinching. She waited while Washington sent Rubio to Rome to repair the damage. And now Trump has broadened the threat. Not just Italy, Germany, Spain, the entire European basing structure is under question. Which means Meloni's calculation that Italy's strategic value made the troop threat unworkable is now being tested on a continental scale. If Trump pulls troops from Germany and the sky does not fall, the threat to Italy becomes more credible. Not because Italy is less valuable, but because Trump has demonstrated he will act on the threat regardless of the operational consequences. That changes the leverage calculation. For every European government with American troops on its soil. But here is what makes Meloni's position different from every other European leader in that room. She is the only one who has already been through this, personally, publicly, with her name attached. Merz found out about the German withdrawal from press reports. Von der Leyen heard about it in Yerevan. Macron learned the same way. Meloni had already heard Trump say her country was no help at all. She had already watched Washington threaten her bases by name. She had already sat through Rubio's visit and understood exactly what it meant. She did not go to Yerevan to discover that America was pulling back. She had already lived it. Which is why, when the other European leaders were still processing the shock of Germany, Meloni was already 3 steps ahead. She knows what the threat looks like. She knows what the bluff looks like. She knows the difference between theatre and policy. And she knows that the next move, for Italy, for Europe, for NATO, cannot wait for Washington to decide what it wants. That is the calculation every European leader is now being forced to make. Meloni made it first. There is one more number that matters here: 80 years. That is how long American troops have been stationed in Germany, since 1945, since the end of the Second World War. Through the Cold War, the fall of the wall, the reunification of Germany, the enlargement of NATO, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. 80 years of presence, of commitment, of deterrence. Gone in a weekend, without a phone call to the Chancellor, without a briefing to the alliance, without a plan for what comes next. European leaders in Yerevan were careful not to say the word that was in every room. But NATO Secretary-General Rutte said there had been disappointment on the US side. Callas said she did not know what was in Trump's head. Von der Leyen talked about like-minded friends with stable supply chains. None of them said the word, but all of them were thinking it. Abandoned. Subscribe to The Record Room, because the next file is already open.